Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Among the news items we have for you this week is the current update on the Omicron variant of the CCP virus, longer-term health complications relating to fertility, specifically pregnancy, and infection with the CCP virus. Dr. Oz is running for the Senate in America, and we have all manner of issues with that. Truly weird and bizarre self-assembling creatures. Timestamps for these and other news items can be found in the description box below. Let's start with the Omicron variant. The Omicron variant is odd for a number of reasons. The first is its name. The World Health Organization has skipped several of the preceding letters in the Greek alphabet that would normally come before Omicron when naming this particular variant. The fact that it's a variant of concern and the oddities in behavior are strange, but by themselves aren't anything to point out. What is worth pointing out is that, much like the Delta variant, the Omicron variant appears to be coming out en masse and spreading very quickly, and at the worst possible time, right as winter is arriving. That is not good news. The fact is, Delta is currently the variant that makes up the vast majority of all infections across the globe. Winter is an opportunity for anyone in the Northern Hemisphere to be infected with this new variant and for it to supplant Delta as the leading infection. Further to the news last week, where there were 19 mutations identified. There are now 30, and 26 of these are unique mutations that have not been seen in other variants. That's an increase of 7 over what we last reported, and this is more than any other variant of the CCP virus has yet exhibited. Unlike the Mu variant, which was fortunately not able to get a foothold, we don't yet know if this new Omicron variant is resistant to vaccines, and that's going to be a significant factor in how much of a problem it becomes. Currently, the Delta variant is able to be treated and reduce the severity and duration of infection through the use of the otherwise standard and readily available vaccines for the CCP virus. This is also why the booster shots which are currently being offered are important. Not only is a booster shot going to provide you with protection, it's also going to ensure, at least in theory, that any new variants are also able to be countered, whether that's adding an extra degree of immunogenicity to the vaccine, thereby making the original strain plus whatever new thing comes out able to be resisted effectively, or if it simply gives you that initial immunity to it that allows your body to deal with it more effectively, just like we do with the influenza vaccine. The booster shots are where it's going to get tricky, and there's an interesting article that goes into this. There are a range of different kinds of booster shots available. Some are based on denaturing the virus itself and then creating an immune response that way. Others rely on mRNA technology. Then there are others again that use their own particular thing. They all have some relationship to using the immune system, but they all also work to try and make it so that you get the best response with the least possible side effects. That's also why there's a variety of methods available. The variation between the different kinds of booster shots available relates to only small changes between them, things like the size of the dose. For example, Moderna's dose is a much larger booster than what Pfizer has available, and this means that in theory, there is more for the immune system to respond to and for longer. That means you're going to get a stronger immune response. Of course, the real-world consequences of these differences aren't anywhere near as significant as would be apparent from the actual dose volume. After all, the immune system doesn't require a lot to act and gain some degree of learned immunity. This is why, in the end, the difference between which particular manufacturer you go with for your booster is unlikely to drastically alter the consequences. At this stage, there is some very early clinical data demonstrating some distinctions between them, But if you're waiting for one vaccine over another because you think it might be better, you really aren't going to gain anything for that delay. In fact, particularly if you are elderly or in certain age groups, choosing one over the other may be worse due to the side effects. For the most part, this is just because there is a stronger immune response from the Moderna vaccine, and as a result, they generally experience significantly more discomfort. Other than that, that's going to be true of any vaccine, so it's not an especially important distinction. So again, to reiterate, insofar as it goes with getting a booster, you really should just take advantage of what you have access to when you have access to it, rather than trying to find something that may not currently be available or may not be available at all for quite some time. Next we have research which is very preliminary and not yet well established that claims chewing gum will help to reduce the spread of the CCP virus. This is, at least, somewhat theoretically arguable. Depending on what is contained within the chewing gum and how it's dealt with, it is entirely possible that it could act as a sort of trap, almost like a sticky fly trap. The virus that is in high amounts in saliva in the mouth will get caught in small ACE2 proteins found within the chewing gum. From here, the virus will stick to these and then be unable to escape. The process of chewing will constantly expose new, fresh exposure sites for the virus to stick to. As a consequence, there's less of it in your saliva and less to be spread when you cough, sneeze, or otherwise expel bodily fluids. As said, in theory, this makes sense. The problems we have with this are how the research was conducted. Primarily, that it was done by taking saliva from patients with the CCP virus and mixing them in test tubes with powdered gum. They then tested the saliva to find out how much of the virus was able to be identified compared to those that had not had the gum added. The differences were significant, so yes, it is there showing that, but as we've noted previously, results observed in a test tube or a petri dish cannot be extrapolated to the real world anywhere as neatly or as directly as you would hope. Rather, it's just the first stage of finding evidence. Caution in this respect is more than warranted, especially when the CDC has just published a report indicating that women who have been infected with the CCP virus have an increased risk of stillbirth. There have been other claims of issues around the vaccines causing sterility, particularly among males. These arguments and quasi-theories have more or less all either been debunked or proven to be made up. Consider the Nicki Minaj incident. What wasn't looked at anywhere near as frequently or in the same level of detail is the effect on women. The research from the CDC and that from elsewhere relies on data sourced from various different organizations, but primarily looking at hospitalizations in the USA. Women with the CCP virus at the time of delivering their child had an increased risk of stillbirth, nearly twice the risk. That's a significant increase. The relative risk is one thing, but this relative risk gets even more bleak when you look at the details of it. If you take the COVID-19 period and you split it to pre-Delta and Delta variant periods, the pre-Delta period had a relative risk of 1.47, or about 50% higher than would otherwise be normal. The Delta period is 4.04, that is 4 times the risk. Currently, about 1 in 160 births each year in the USA are stillbirths. If you take the more extreme data, which would be current based on the Delta variant's prevalence, that is now going to be approximately 4 in 160 births. A huge increase. Further to that, a huge increase that can be significantly dampened by the widespread use of the various COVID-19 vaccinations that are available. The widespread reticence to use various very well-proven remedies is in part driven by people having a reasonable degree of skepticism about authority. It's quite reasonable to look at someone telling you must do something and ask, why? This is something people should apply more widely, not just to vaccines. For example, Dr. Oz, or more accurately Dr. Mehmet Oz. He is, at least officially, a board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon, layman's terms, a heart surgeon. Someone who would, if you had a heart attack, be the one to go in, find the blockages, replace heart valves, or whatever it takes to get your heart pumping blood again. He's also someone who has at various times touted a wide range of cure-alls that are complete and utter bunk. This is the same man who now wants to be responsible for holding a seat in the US Senate. Admittedly, after the God Emperor Trump's 2020 defeat, it's no wonder that various other celebrities are now trying to move in and achieve the same sort of clout that Trump did when he won presidency. Why, though, Dr. Oz wants to be in the Senate is something of a mystery. While he has made various claims in public as to why he would like to be a senator, we must take those with a grain of salt, given his inconsistencies when reporting to that exact same Senate about what he did and why he did it, and then what he actually did in reality. Something we've described in great detail in a past video. You can find that as Dr. Oz, a modern-day snake oil salesman. If we ignore just the aspect of it where his own word is unreliable, we need to ask ourselves, is it really worth voting for somebody who, at least in theory, claims to base their decisions on medical knowledge and at least some sort of scientific method, but at the same time ignores all of the scientific evidence and medical knowledge to make spurious claims? As we mentioned, there's a certain inconsistency that is simply unable to be reconciled with the role that he's going for. Going from the crazy political and medical news to instead weird and somewhat crazy robotic biology type news. Scientists describe their own self-assembling and self-replicating robots which are made from living cells. That sounds very uncomfortably like a Terminator, just not yet at the level where they'll be back. The reality is that, for this at least, they are tiny little constructs made out of living cells that can then begin providing mechanical functionality. The mechanical functionality isn't all that new. Only last week we spoke about modifying some of the ways that the cells will work to ensure they turn into particular kinds of cells in situ. This involved modifying the mechanical processes that go on inside of it. In this case, rather than modify the cells so that they turn into something in particular, they were instead changed to try and achieve a particular outcome. This research is, of course, very, very simple things. In this case, they're able to pile up on top of themselves and create lumps of cells. At a very small level, this isn't a particularly useful process. If you want to see something very similar in, at least process, look to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. This is a similar process. Millions and millions of years of cells piling up on top of each other, dying, calcifying, and then the cells being washed away have created a gigantic system of structures. Quite an amazing set of structures in that respect as well. While we have no anticipation of this process being used in anything near the same degree as that, it could be used to create much smaller, less complicated, and very unique structures. Rather, it could be used to create something far more standardized. And that news is already weird, but it's the next bit of animal-type news that is even more bizarre. scientists say they found a way to read the minds of jellyfish. To be blunt, we thought jellyfish had no mind as such. They were relatively basic organisms with a relatively complex set of neurons extending outwards throughout their entire body. This allowed them to engage in relatively simple, but also complex movements. For example, grabbing onto something tiny and eating it. Something like an anemone can also do. This makes a bit of sense if you look at it, as jellyfish are mostly water, a gelatinous membrane, some inside processes, and that's about it. How they can think with that is simply unimaginable to us until reading this article. As we've mentioned, the jellyfish has a very simple nervous system. It's almost like an umbrella with everything spreading out from a central point and down through the tendrils. These tendrils and the various neurons associated with them going all the way back to the center of the body are divided up into sections. Each of these sections then has to deal with everything itself. This is where the mind-reading claims come in. The research was able to track the movement of the neurons and the activity within them to see how they reacted to a stimulus, such as catching prey. The various parts of the jellyfish had to fire the neurons in a particular way and sequence. Without that happening, they would not be able to capture it. In fact, it's the same way that some humans experience things like tics or have issues with controlling bodily motions. The neurons are not sending the right signals in the right way at the right time. The final news item we have for you is somewhat less optimistic than everything else so far. It's expected that before very long, 1 out of every 15 lights in the night sky could be a satellite. Admittedly, it's more accurate to say 1 in every 7 lights, since it's estimated that roughly half of the lights we see in the night sky in the form of stars have long since died, and the lights just continuing to travel to us while we wait to see their death. 1 in every 7 is still a significant number, especially when you consider how many of these will become rubbish before very long. One of the current front-leading culprits for this is Elon Musk's Starlink, where up until relatively recently, all the satellites they launched had very serious issues where they became pretty much the brightest object in the night sky and were interfering with various things, notably astronomical photography. The authors of the article note that at least all year round there will be a minimum of 200 satellites visible. That's 200 objects up in the sky that could be a star, they could be a satellite, or they could be Superman. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.